They say a parent's love is unbreakable, but what happens when your own child betrays you? When the son you raised, your pride and joy, chooses a path that tears your world apart? This is a story of tough love, loss, and the hope of redemption. My name's Tom. I'm 52, and I've been hauling freight across the Midwest for over 2 decades. I live in Kansas City, Missouri, in a small two-bedroom house with a sagging porch and a fridge that's always half empty. It's just me and my son, Ethan, who's 16 now, divorced his mom when he was 5. She moved to California, chasing some dream that didn't include us. I got custody, and I swore I'd give Ethan everything I could. He was my reason to keep going, you know? Those early years, it was just us, grilling burgers in the backyard, watching Chiefs games, teaching him to change a tire. I thought I was doing okay as a dad, even with the long hours on the road. Trucking's a grind. You're gone for days, sometimes weeks, sleeping in your cab, eating gas station sandwiches, and missing birthdays. But every mile I drove was for Ethan, to pay for his clothes, his school supplies, that beat-up guitar he begged for at 12. I'd come home exhausted, and he'd run out to hug me, all gap-toothed and grinning. Those moments made it worth it. I thought we were tight, like nothing could break us. But then Ethan hit 14, and things changed. Puberty, I guess. Or maybe it was me being gone too much. He got quiet, started hanging out with these kids from the rougher side of town. I'd see them at the corner store, all baggy clothes and loud laughs, passing around energy drinks like they were beers. Ethan started skipping school, coming home late, smelling like smoke. Not cigarettes, but that skunky weed smell. I tried talking to him, grounding him, but he'd just shrug and say, "You don't get it, Dad." I didn't. I thought it was a phase, that he'd snap out of it. I kept telling myself he was still my kid, the one who'd cry when I left for a long haul. Last summer, it got worse. He was 15, and those friends of his were over all the time. I'd find beer cans in the trash, and once, a pocket knife I didn't recognize on the couch. I confronted him, and he screamed at me. First time he ever raised his voice like that. "You're never here," he yelled. "You don't know me anymore." That hit like a punch. I wanted to fix it, but I didn't know how. I was working overtime to cover bills, and every dollar went to keeping us afloat. I thought I was showing love by providing, but maybe I was just leaving him alone too much. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, and I'd just gotten back from a week-long run to Omaha. I was beat, barely able to keep my eyes open, but I noticed my truck wasn't in the driveway. It's a 2015 Freightliner, my livelihood, paid off after years of sweat. I figured I'd parked it at the depot by mistake. Happens when you're running on fumes, but when I called Ethan to check, he didn't answer. I called again, texted, nothing. By midnight, I was pacing, my gut telling me something was wrong. At 2 a.m., my phone rang. It was the cops. My truck was totaled, wrapped around a pole on the edge of town. Ethan was behind the wheel, joyriding with his buddies. No one was hurt. Thank God. But the truck was done, front end smashed, axle bent. The officer said Ethan claimed I let him take it, that it was my fault for not locking it up, my own son, lying to save his skin. I stood there, staring at the phone, feeling like the ground dropped out from under me. How did we get here? How did my boy, my Ethan, turn into someone who'd steal from me and point the finger back? The next morning, I drove my old pickup to the impound lot, my hand shaking on the wheel, the side of my Freightliner, my lifeline, crumpled like a soda can made my chest tighten. I'd spent years paying it off, polishing it, keeping it running like new. Now it was scrap, and my own son had done it. I kept replaying Ethan's lie. "Dad let me take it, dash." Those words cut deeper than the crash itself. I raised him to own his mistakes, not to throw me under the bus. Ethan was at the police station, sitting in a plastic chair, his hoodie pulled low over his eyes. He wouldn't look at me. The officer, a guy named Ramirez with tired eyes, explained the situation. Ethan and his buddies took the truck for a joyride. Racing through back roads, blasting music, they lost control on a turn, and bam, pole, the other kids bolted, leaving Ethan to take the fall. He could have been arrested, maybe charged with theft or reckless driving, but his story about me letting him drive muddied things. No proof, no charges. Yet, Ramirez gave me a look, Like he knew Ethan was lying but couldn't prove it. Talk to your kid, he said. He's on a bad path. I drove Ethan home in silence. My anger was a knot in my throat, but I didn't yell. I wanted him to say something, anything, an apology, an explanation, but he just stared out the window, earbuds in, like I wasn't even there when we got home. I finally snapped. Why, Ethan? Why'd you take it? And why lie? He shrugged, that same shrug I'd seen for months. Didn't think it'd be a big deal, he mumbled. A big deal? That truck was our roof, our food, his future. I told him to go to his room, but it felt pointless. He was already gone, in a way. The next week was a blur of bad news. My boss at the trucking company called. Without a rig, I couldn't work. Insurance wouldn't cover the crash because Ethan wasn't authorized to drive it. I begged for a loaner truck, but they were short on equipment. Sorry. Tom, my boss said, we gotta let you go. 20 years of loyalty, gone in a phone call. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills, mortgage, utilities, Ethan's school fees. I had maybe 2 months' savings. Panic clawed at me, but I couldn't let Ethan see it. He didn't seem to care anyway. I tried talking to him again, hoping to break through. I knocked on his door, found him texting, probably to those same friends who ditched him. Ethan, this is serious, I said. I lost my job. We could lose the house. He rolled his eyes. You'll figure it out, Dad. You always do. Then he said something that broke me. Maybe if you were around more, I wouldn't need to hang with them. It was like a knife. I wanted to scream that I was gone to provide for him, dash, that every mile I drove was for us, dash. But I just walked out, too hurt to fight. Days later, I got a call from Ramirez. They'd found security footage from a gas station near the crash. It showed Ethan hot-wiring the truck, proof he stole it. The DA was considering charges, but they dropped them if I pressed no charges as his guardian. I had a choice. Protect Ethan or let him face the law. Part of me wanted him to learn, to feel the weight of what he'd done. But he was my son, my only family. I told Ramirez I'd think about it, but my head was spinning. Ethan's friends were still out there, probably laughing while I was drowning, and Ethan? He was pulling away, choosing them over me, over us. I lay awake that night, wondering where I went wrong, if I'd failed him as a dad. All I knew was the trust we had was gone, and I didn't know how to get it back. I spent the next few days wrestling with Ramirez's call, let Ethan face charges or protect him. It felt like choosing between my son and my principles. I'd always taught him actions have consequences, but seeing him in handcuffs? That image gutted me. I kept picturing him at 6, clinging to my leg when I left for a haul, begging me to stay. Now he was 15, stealing my truck, lying to cops, and acting like I was the enemy. I didn't recognize him anymore. And that scared me more than the bills piling up. I tried to keep busy, applying for jobs at every trucking company in a 50-mile radius. Most said they'd call back, but I could hear the pity in their voices. A driver without a rig is like a chef without a kitchen. Useless. My savings were draining fast, and the mortgage was due in 2 weeks. I sold some old tools and a recliner to cover groceries, but Ethan didn't notice. He was out with those friends again, coming home past curfew, ignoring my texts. I wanted to lock the door, force him to talk, but I was afraid he'd just run off for good. One night, I sat him down. The kitchen table felt like a battleground. Ethan, I said, keeping my voice steady. The cops have proof you stole the truck. You could go to juvie. His eyes flicked up, finally showing something fear. Maybe, you gonna let them take me? He asked, his voice small for the first time in months. I wanted to hug him, tell him I'd fix it. But I couldn't. You lied to me, to the cops. You cost me my job. Why should I protect you? He didn't answer, just stared at the floor. I pushed harder. Who were those kids in the truck? They left you to take the fall. He shrugged, muttering, they're my friends. Friends? They were leeches, using him, but he couldn't see it. I called Ramirez the next day and said I wouldn't press charges, not because Ethan deserved it, but because I couldn't lose him to the system. I told Ethan he was off the hook, but he had to stay home. No friends, no phone, he nodded. But I could tell he was just waiting me out. Sure enough, 2 nights later, he snuck out. I found his window open, his bed empty. I drove around Kansas City till dawn, checking his usual spots, gas stations, the park, that sketchy arcade downtown. No sign of him. I came home, sat on the couch, and cried for the first time since my divorce. I wasn't just losing my job or the house, I was losing my son. The next morning, Ethan stumbled in, smelling like cheap vodka and regret. I didn't yell. I was too tired. Where were you? I asked. He mumbled something about a party, then went in his room and slammed the door. I wanted to break it down, shake him, make him see what he was doing to us. But I just sat there, staring at a photo on the fridge, us fishing at the lake when he was 10. Both grinning like the world was ours. I didn't know how to get back to that. A week later, I got a lead on a job, delivery driver for a local warehouse, not trucking, but it was something. The pay was half what I made before, and I'd have to sell the house to stay afloat. I told Ethan we might have to move, maybe to a smaller apartment. He exploded. "This is your fault." He yelled. "You're always working, always gone." I didn't ask for this. I stood there, stunned. My fault? I'd given him everything, and he was blaming me for his choices. That was the moment I realized he'd chosen those friends over me, over our family. I didn't say anything. I just walked away, knowing if I didn't let go, we'd both drown. Ethan's words, blaming me for everything, echoed in my head for days. I'd spent years driving endless miles to keep us fed, to give him a home, and he saw me as the problem. It hurt worse than losing the truck, worse than losing my job. I kept thinking about that fishing photo on the fridge, how happy we were. I wanted my son back, but I was starting to see that coddling him wasn't helping. He was slipping away, and maybe the only way to save him was to let him fall. I made a choice that week, the hardest one yet. I called Ramirez and told him to let the DA pursue charges, not theft. Ethan was still my son, but something like reckless driving or underage drinking from the crash. I didn't want him locked up. But he needed a wake-up call. Ramirez warned me it could mean community service, maybe a stint in a diversion program. I nodded, feeling like I was betraying him, but deep down, I knew shielding him had only made things worse. Ethan had to learn that. Actions have weight. When I told him, he lost it. "You're ratting me out?" He screamed, throwing a water bottle across the kitchen. "You're supposed to be my dad." I stayed calm, though my heart was breaking. "I am your dad," I said. "That's why I'm doing this. You stole from me, lied, and you're running with people who don't care about you. This stops now." He stormed to his room, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. I heard him crying later, muffled through the wall, but I didn't go to him, not this time. With Ethan spiraling, I had to focus on survival. I took the warehouse job, driving a delivery van for $18 an hour. It was a far cry from trucking. No open road, just stop-and-go traffic and sore knees from climbing in and out. I put the house up for sale, knowing we couldn't afford it anymore. The realtor was kind, but her smile didn't hide the truth. We'd barely break even. I started packing boxes at night, sorting through old memories, Ethan's baby shoes, his first report card. A drawing he made of us as superheroes. Each one felt like a goodbye to the life I thought we'd have. Ethan's court date came a month later. He got 50 hours of community service and mandatory counseling, plus a curfew. He hated it, of course, but I saw a flicker of the old Ethan when he came home from his first session, quieter, like he was thinking. I tried to talk to him, but he'd just grunt and head to his room. His friends stopped coming around. Guess he wasn't fun anymore without a truck to steal. I hoped it was a sign he'd wake up, but he still kept me at arm's length, like I was the one who'd crashed our lives. One night, I found him in the garage, staring at my old toolbox. "You selling this too?" he asked, his voice sharp. I shook my head. "Some things I'm keeping." He nodded, then said, "I'm sorry about the truck." It was the first time he'd apologized, and it hit me hard. I wanted to pull him into a hug, tell him we'd be okay, but the wall between us was still there. "I know," I said, "but sorry doesn't fix it. You gotta show me you mean it." He looked away, and I knew we weren't there yet. Moving day loomed, and I found a cheap apartment across town. 1 bedroom, a pull-out couch for Ethan. It felt like failure, trading our home for a cramped box. But I had no choice, as I packed the last of our stuff. I wondered if letting Ethan face the law would save him, or if I just pushed him further away. All I knew was I couldn't keep chasing the kid he used to be. I had to let go, for both of us. The new apartment smelled like stale carpet and cheap paint. It was a 1-bedroom on the edge of Kansas City, with thin walls and a flickering kitchen light I couldn't afford to fix. Ethan took the bedroom. I insisted, though he didn't thank me. I slept on a pull-out couch that creaked every time I moved. At night, I'd lie there, listening to the hum of traffic and Ethan's music leaking through the door, wondering how we'd ended up here. Selling the house had covered the last of the bills, but it left us with nothing extra, no safety net, just me and a kid who barely spoke to me. Work at the warehouse was relentless. I'd load my van at 5 a.m., deliver packages all day, and drag myself home by dusk. The pay barely covered rent and groceries, and I'd catch myself calculating every expense in my head. $2 for coffee, $10 for gas, $30 for Ethan's bus pass. I stopped eating lunch to save cash, telling myself it was temporary. But the worst part wasn't the money, it was coming home to Ethan's silence. He'd be on his phone, doing his community service hours or at counseling. But he wouldn't talk about it. I'd ask how his day was, and he'd mutter, "Fine," before disappearing to his room. I tried to keep things normal or what passed for it. I'd cook spaghetti, his old favorite, hoping it'd spark something. One night, I set the table, called him out, and he actually sat down. For a second, it felt like old times, like we were a team again. Then he pushed his plate away, barely touched, and said, "This tastes like crap." It wasn't about the food, it was him pushing me away, testing me. I wanted to snap, tell him how hard I was trying, but I just cleared the dishes and said, "Maybe next time." I couldn't keep fighting him. I was too tired. At work, I started hearing about a new trucking company hiring out of Topeka, about an hour away. They had a rep for taking chances on drivers who'd hit rough patches. I sent in an application, not expecting much. To my shock, they called me for an interview. The catch? They'd provide a truck, but I'd need to start with short hauls, lower pay than I was used to. It was a step back, but it was a chance. I told Ethan about it, hoping he'd care. "Cool," he said, not looking up from his phone. I swallowed the hurt and kept going. Ethan's counseling seemed to be doing something, though. One day, I overheard him talking to his counselor on a Zoom call. Door cracked open. He was talking about the crash, how his friends egged him on, how he felt trapped. "I didn't want to let them down," he said. His voice shaky. It was the first time I'd heard him admit anything real. I stood there, frozen, wanting to barge in and hug him, but I didn't. He wasn't ready to share that with me. Not yet. Still, it gave me a sliver of hope. Like maybe he was starting to see the mess he'd made. But hope was fragile. A week later, I found a vape pen in his backpack while doing laundry. I confronted him, holding it up like evidence. "You're still doing this?" I asked. He rolled his eyes. "It's just a vape. Dad, chill." I wanted to throw it against the wall, screamed that he was throwing away his second chance. Instead, I took a breath and said, "You're better than this, Ethan. I know you are." He didn't respond, just grabbed his bag and left for his community service. I sat on the couch, head in my hands, wondering if I was fighting a losing battle, but I couldn't give up. Not on him, not on us. I'd let him face the consequences. But I'd be there when he was ready to come back. I just hoped it wouldn't take too long. The Topeka trucking job was a lifeline, but it wasn't glamorous. I started 2 weeks after the interview, driving short hauls, mostly farm equipment and supplies. Nothing like the long-distance runs I used to do. The cab was older, the seats worn, and the pay was barely enough to keep the lights on in our cramped apartment. But it was a truck, and I was back on the road, feeling a piece of myself again. Every morning, I'd leave at 4 a.m., the Kansas sky still dark, and I'd think about Ethan, wondering if he'd be home when I got back or off with those kids again. Ethan's community service was almost done, and his counselor said he was making progress. Whatever that meant, he still barely talked to me. But I noticed small things. He'd wash the dishes sometimes, unasked, or leave the TV on the Chiefs game when I got home, like he knew I'd watch. Once, I found a crumpled note in the trash, a school assignment where he wrote about someone you admire. It was about me, from years ago, how I taught him to ride a bike. Reading it felt like a punch, because he hadn't said anything like that to my face in years. I folded it up, tucked it in my wallet, and didn't mention it. He wasn't ready for that conversation. But the vape pen incident stuck with me. I started checking his backpack when he was out, hating myself for it. I didn't find anything else, but the trust was gone, and I knew he felt it too. One night, I tried to bridge the gap. I brought home pizza, set it on the coffee table, and said, "Let's eat together, no phones." He hesitated, then sat down. For a few minutes, it was almost normal, him grabbing a slice, me cracking a dumb joke about pepperoni. Then he got a text, and his face changed. "Gotta go," he said, standing up. I grabbed his arm. Not hard, just enough to stop him. "Ethan, stay. Talk to me." He pulled away. "You don't get it, Dad. They need me." I let him go, watching him disappear into the night, wondering who they were and why they mattered more than us. At work, I was finding my rhythm. The other drivers were decent guys, mostly older, with their own stories of hard times. One, a guy named Carl, took me under his wing. He'd been through a divorce, raised a daughter alone, and saw the bags under my eyes. "Kids'll break your heart," he said one day over coffee. "But you keep showing up. That's what counts." I nodded, but I wasn't sure I was showing up enough for Ethan. I was gone most of the day, and when I was home, we were like strangers sharing a space. A few weeks later, Ethan's counselor called. She said he'd opened up about the crash, admitting he took the truck to impress his friends, to feel like he belonged. "He's carrying a lot of guilt," she said. "He's scared to face you." I wanted to believe it, but guilt didn't explain why he kept running to those kids. I asked if he'd talk to me in a session. She said she'd try, but Ethan was resistant. "Give him time," she said. Time was all I had, but it felt like it was running out. One evening, I came home early and found Ethan on the couch, staring at the ceiling. No music, no phone, just him and his thoughts. "You okay?" I asked, sitting across from him. He didn't answer for a long time, then said, "I messed up, Dad. I know it." His voice cracked, and I saw the kid I used to know, buried under all that anger. I wanted to say a million things, how much I loved him, how scared I was for him. But I just said, "I'm here, Ethan, whenever you're ready." He nodded, barely, and went to his room. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going, to keep hoping he'd come back to me. The trucking job in Topeka was starting to feel like a second chance. After a few months, my boss noticed I was reliable, always on time, no complaints, and hinted at a promotion to longer hauls with better pay. It wasn't my old life, but it was enough to start saving a little, maybe even get us out of that dingy apartment someday. I'd come home with sore shoulders, but a bit of hope, thinking maybe I could rebuild what Ethan and I had lost. But hope was a tightrope, and Ethan was still a million miles away. He'd finished his community service, picking up trash at the park and painting over graffiti. I thought it might humble him, but he still carried that chip on his shoulder. Counseling was the only place he seemed to open up, though he never told me much. I'd catch him writing in a notebook sometimes, something his counselor suggested, but he'd slam it shut if I got too close. I didn't push. I'd learned pushing just made him run faster. Instead, I kept showing up, cooking dinner, asking about his day. Even when he gave me one-word answers, Carl, my coworker, kept saying, "Kids come around when they're ready." I clung to that like a lifeline. One Saturday, I got a call from Ethan's counselor. She wanted us to try a joint session. "He's starting to process things," she said. "He's mentioned you more, how he feels he let you down." My heart jumped, but I was scared, too. What if he just yelled at me again? I agreed, and the next week, we sat in her office, a small room with 2 bright lights and a box of tissues on the table. Ethan slouched in his chair, picking at his nails. While I tried not to fidget, the counselor asked him to share something with me. Anything. He was quiet for so long I thought he'd bail. Then he said, "I didn't mean to hurt you, Dad. I was mad at everything." I waited, letting him talk. He said his friends made him feel like he mattered, like he wasn't just the kid whose dad was always gone. "They dared me to take the truck," he said, his voice low. "I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway." Hearing him admit it, without excuses, was like a weight lifting. I told him I was proud he was being honest, that it took guts. He looked at me, eyes wet, and nodded. It wasn't a hug or a big moment, but it was the first crack in the wall between us. Back home, things didn't magically fix themselves. Ethan still spent too much time on his phone, and I caught him sneaking out once, though he swore it was just to grab food. I wanted to believe him, but trust was a two-way street, and we were both still learning to walk it. At work, I got the promotion, longer hauls, better pay. It meant more time away, which worried me. I sat Ethan down and told him about it. I need this job, I said, but I need you to meet me halfway. No more sneaking out. No more lies. He didn't promise anything, just said, I'll try. It was enough for now. One night, I came home late, expecting the usual silence. Instead, Ethan was in the kitchen, heating up leftovers. Made too much, he mumbled, pushing a plate toward me. It was just macaroni and cheese, but it felt like a peace offering. We ate together, not saying much, but the quiet wasn't heavy for once. I looked at him, saw the kid who used to draw superheroes, and thought maybe, just maybe, we were starting to find our way back. I didn't know what was next, but I knew I'd keep showing up, no matter how long it took. The next year was like driving through fog, slow, uncertain, but you keep going, hoping the road clears. My new hauling job was steady, and the extra pay let us move to a better apartment, one with 2 bedrooms and a view of something other than a parking lot. I'd come home from runs, expecting Ethan to be gone or glued to his phone, but he started sticking around more. He'd leave his door open sometimes, music playing low, or ask if I wanted to watch a game. Small things, but they felt like miracles after everything. Ethan was 17 now, taller than me, with a quietness that wasn't angry anymore. Counseling had ended, but he kept that notebook, scribbling in it when he thought I wasn't looking. I never read it. Felt like crossing a line. But I noticed he wasn't hanging with those old friends anymore. One day, I asked about them. He shrugged, said they weren't real friends. They just wanted someone to follow them. It was the first time he'd admitted they used him. I nodded, not pushing, but inside, I was cheering. Maybe tough love was working, letting him face the mess he'd made. Work was my anchor. I'd earned respect at the company, even got a newer truck. Carl, my buddy from work, would joke that I was back in the game. I'd laugh, but it was more than that. Every paycheck, every mile, was me proving to myself, and maybe to Ethan, that we could climb out of the hole. I started setting aside a little for his college fund, even if he didn't know it yet. I wanted him to have options, to not feel trapped like I did when I was his age. One night, Ethan surprised me. I came home to find him cooking actual food, not just microwave junk. He'd made burgers, a little burnt, but he'd set the table with real plates, not paper. Thought we could eat together, he said. Almost shy, we sat down. And for the first time in years, we talked, not about the crash or the lies, but about normal stuff, school, his new interest in fixing cars, how he wanted to learn to drive legally. I teased him about parallel parking, and he laughed, a real laugh, like the kid I remembered. I went to bed that night feeling lighter, like we were finally on the same road. Years later, when Ethan was 20, he showed up at my place unannounced. I'd moved to a small house again, nothing fancy, but mine. He was in community college, working part-time at an auto shop, and living with roommates. We'd been talking more, but it was still careful, like we were both afraid to break what we'd rebuilt. That day, he sat on my couch, holding a coffee mug, and said, "Dad, I'm sorry for the truck, for lying, for everything." His voice broke, and I saw the weight he'd been carrying. He told me how ashamed he'd felt, how he'd pushed me away because he couldn't face himself. "You didn't give up on me," he said, "even when I deserved it." I hugged him, something we hadn't done in years, and told him I'd always be his dad, no matter what. We didn't fix everything that day, but it was a start. We started having dinners together, catching games, even working on an old car he'd bought to fix up. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Letting him face those consequences back then, letting him learn the hard way, saved us both. I learned love sometimes means stepping back, giving them room to grow, even when it hurts like hell. And Ethan? He's still finding his way, but he's doing it with me in his corner, and that's enough.